Hi everyone. What I want to talk about today is the pay gap. So when I say that, the pay gap, you know what I mean, right? That's what I want to talk about. In Australia, the pay gap sits at 14.2%. I hear a lot of people say 30%, but the only statistic I can find on that is for artists. And artists, that's so variable and unsteady, that industry. I don't know why you'd ever choose that, unless you just want the biggest possible number you can because it suits your political argument, which I suggest many people do. Australia has a workplace gender equality agency. Hey, I didn't know either, but I read the website, and it defines gender pay gap as the measure of the difference between the average earnings of women and men in the workforce. And it goes, and I like this, it goes on to say, it is not the difference between two people being paid differently for the work of the same or comparable value, which is illegal or unlawful. So we're not talking about two people at the same engineering firm doing the same job getting paid different. We're saying just generally when women work in the workforce, they seem to make less money. And obviously if you work part-time, or if you're like casual, or if you're not really trying hard for getting pay rises or something, that's always going to happen. And the first thing that strikes me, this is just terrible nomenclature. This is bad language. Why would you call it the pay gap? Why wouldn't you call it the shit decisions made at uni when you were 19 years old gap, or something like dropped out to have babies gap, or don't define yourself as being a sole income earner and that being your identity in the world gap. I would say that they're calling it the pay gap purely to try and, it's an emotional argument. And I always find that ironic because the sexist thing in the world is that women are too emotional or something like that, or men are too logical, or women can't be logical. And to try and fix this, we make this shit emotional argument to women to try and appeal to their compassion or something like that, which I find hilarious but also pathetic. The interesting thing is this Workplace Gender Equality Agency and the Australian Bureau of Statistics, so two bodies, and the ABS, Australian Bureau of Statistics, is huge. It's where all our census data goes to. They both show gender pay gap favouring full-time working men over full-time working women in every single industry and occupational category in Australia. Like, that's across the board. There isn't even one where women make more than men. I mean, that's, you think like modelling, or like in clerical work, clerical support work, women are 65% of that workforce. In sales and this, and like when you work in like sales in like a department store in a shopping centre, 69% are women. And in professionals, like as an accountant or lawyer or something like that, 56% of the workforce are women. Even in those industries that are female dominated, there's a gap, right? And so perhaps the answer is that just all industries are sexist, every single one of them, even if they're female dominated. But you know what? Perhaps the answer is that in every single industry, the baby grows inside the woman and it never grows inside the man. I mean, hey, that might be it too, right? But let's just call it the pay gap. So I find this a very in bad faith sort of argument, but I want to get into it. So 25% of women, this is the USA, the stats I got came from America, but America and Australia are not that different. Only 25% of women in the US are the breadwinners, in a relationship. So 75% of men. So obviously, when you're the breadwinner, there's pressure on you to go and not quit your job at the drop of a hat and push for a pay rise and think about your career more. And here's the really big one: only 4% of two-parent families have the father as the stay-at-home father, and it's 27% have a mother that's a stay-at-home mother, and the others shared responsibilities, or both parents don't work. And I think it's only like 6% is both parents don't work. So I mean, hey, when you've got a stay-at-home wife, there's got a hell of a lot of pressure on you to work hard and make different sorts of choices. So I mean, why is this unfair? If you are the sole income earner, I mean, fuck it, yeah, you should be trying really hard to get a pay rise, and you shouldn't just quit, and you don't take part-time work, and you do take every extra hour offered to you so you can make more money. So the reasons that this Workplace Gender Equality Agency gave was conscious and unconscious discrimination and bias in hiring and pay decisions. Number one, who says this isn't a two-way street? Who says there aren't some female managers out there that are discriminating back the other way? And I'd love to know what percentage of the pay gap is attributed to this. It says women and men working in different industries and different jobs with female-dominated industries and jobs attracting lower wages. Well, I mean, like, women choose their industries. If they want to go into, I don't know, clerical support or whatever it is that doesn't make as much money as something else, like 80%, like, you know how you have those degrees at uni, gender, cultural, and like race studies and those sorts of things, like liberal arts degrees that everyone, gender studies degrees that everyone takes the piss out of all the time. 80% of people that enroll in that are female. I mean, they don't make much money. 80% of people that enroll in engineering are male. Now, they make lots of money, engineers, so I mean, people make their own choices. And this idea that female-dominated industries don't get paid as much, I mean, are we really saying that we're not going to rely on the market forces to work out what efficient prices are? How do you undermine the market system? Why, if they're offering lower prices to someone, how do you ever undermine the market system? Prices are efficient. I don't think people that make these sorts of claims genuinely understand what market pressures really are. This website cites a lack of workplace flexibility to accommodate caring and other responsibilities, especially in senior roles. Of course, this assumes that women are the carers, which yes, they are. But I mean, and this is something I really want to talk about later, you try being a man going dating and saying, hey, I have no career ambitions, I'm not ever going to make money, I just want to stay at home and look after the babies that you make inside your uteruses. Man, you don't date very well if you're a guy like that. That's my opinion. I'm going to get more into that later. I will support that opinion. But if we want men to stay at home and be the carers, which I think is the whole issue, then you've got to find men, like caring men, stay-at-home father type men, attractive. That 4% of stay-at-home fathers stat has been around for 30 years. It hasn't moved since 1991. I mean, that's a hell of a long time. Kurt Cobain was still alive. And then they have the women's disproportionate share of unpaid caring and domestic work. I just don't fucking understand that point at all. Like, stay-at-home wives have lots of money. Their husbands transfer the money onto their credit card, onto their account. Of course they're paid. How on earth are you going to call a woman that stays at home unpaid when she is paid? I just don't get that. I know they've also done like scientific studies where they've sat men and women in the room and like leaked in the smell of like nappies or a toilet or a bin or something like that. And they've proven time and time again that it's the women that detect the smell first. They've got better senses of smell. It's biological. And they've shown like a dirty surface and said, would you cook on this? And men go like, yeah, I cook on that. That's fine. And women tend to go, no, it's not clean enough. It needs more cleaning. Ergo, women seem to want to do more cleaning. Well, they have to do more cleaning until they're happy. And I'm really confused by the statistic they try and support that with. They say in 2016, working age men spent 36 hours in paid employment and 13 and a half hours on household chores on average a week. So that's 51 hours work for men, but they say in the same year, women spent 25 hours on paid employment and 20 hours on housework. That's only 45. It seems that we're doing more. I think their stat might be wrong on that. I don't know. But anyway, what I think it all comes down to is this, that if you are a 17-year-old person and you want to go dating, you have to be attractive to, assuming everyone's heterosexual, which 98% of the population is, so for our purposes here, I'll just talk about heterosexual people. If you want to go dating and you're a guy, if, capital I, capital F, if it's the case that you have to be a high income earning individual to be able to date well, then you will make yourself a high income earning individual. If you're female and all you really need is like big boobs, long legs and whatever, then that's what you'll tend to do. Why? Because you'll date better if you do. It seems obvious to me that there's a huge pressure on males to earn a lot of money, and that pressure isn't on women, so men are just always going to earn more money, or at least, I mean to say something like put more focus on their career or make the sorts of choices that will lead to better career options as they go further on. Now, okay, maybe this is all just a social construct that we can socially engineer and change the meaning of words and blah, 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 and fix all this. Well, number one, we haven't seemed to be able to fix this in about 30 years. So, and we seem to have been really trying, especially in the last decade with political correctness and woke and all that sort of stuff that's happening. So maybe we can't fix it. We've tried and we've failed. But the other big piece of evidence, I mean, this is a long story. I wrote a book on it once. You'll find it on my website. But there's significant genetic evidence when you compare our mitochondrial DNA, which we get entirely from our mother, and in men, Y chromosome DNA, which we get entirely from our fathers. If you compare those two, you'll see much more diversity in the genetics we get from our mothers. And that means we've had more mothers. And that's really common. Most animal species everywhere, there are more mothers than fathers. Jordan Peterson talks about this. You'll find it in like Pinker's work and Charles Murray's work. But what that means is if there's an island, there's 100 men and 100 women on there, all the women get pregnant by about 20% of the men or something like that, and 80% of the men just don't mate. Now there's two ways that plays out. On the one hand, you get like a big silverback or a lion or someone that bites everyone and fights everyone until the other males go away and they sort of like capture a harem. Or you get something like a peacock that has feathers so big and bright and blue and beautiful that the women choose him over all the other peacocks. It seems obvious that we males are like peacocks. You're looking at something that I have that chimpanzees don't have, a beard, and you're listening to another one, a deep voice. Neither chimpanzee males nor females have a beard. This is something that's evolved as we left chimpanzees. And in the chimpanzee world, the male has the higher voice, that screechy sort of, I'm going to fight you, I'm a chimpanzee sort of voice that you'll hear at the zoo and things like that. This deep voice of mine and my beard and my broad shoulders and my square jaw and a whole bunch of other things, muscle development and blah, 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 is because of a high testosterone level. Female sexual preference is literally evolution, and if you're cynical, you might even call it eugenics. Tend to select males that have certain qualities or characteristics or phenotypes, I think you're supposed to say, that other men don't. And it seems obvious that the sorts of men that women are choosing are high testosterone males. Now, Christianity comes along and says, enough of that, so does Islam, so do the Hebrews. They say, one man, one woman, no homosexuality, arranged marriage, and the female doesn't get to be choosy about who she wants. It doesn't matter whether he's high testosterone or low testosterone. He's her husband, and that's the only guy she can have kids with. And then Germaine Greer and Gloria Steinem and co. come along and liberate women sexually, and which really means liberate men sexually, but they liberate us both, and now women can choose again. You go out to the nightclubs or onto Tinder or wherever it is that you want to date, it's still the case that this 80-20 rule is about. Most men don't date very well. In their 30s, they might get lucky and marry some lady and settle down, and she might have kids to another guy already or something. So technically, all men do marry and all men do eventually have sex and can have kids perhaps if they want. But the reality is some men are more attractive than others, and when you want to go looking to find out what sort of characteristics these attractive men have to have, I mean, there's lots of places to look. Dataclysm by Christian Rudder, the book, shows what sorts of, like, that most men are considered less, like 80% of men are considered unattractive. And the characteristics of what the men look like is like your consummate alpha male kind of guy. If you look at the pickup artist kind of crowd, like the Red Pill crowd online, they say the same thing. If you look at women's romance novels, you know, Christian Grey, Edward Cullen, it's the guy from James Bond is perhaps another one. I'm trying to think of Bridget Jones's Diary, you know, like the human rights lawyer guy, Mr. Darcy, Heathcliff, the classic sorts of characters that women seem to want to fall in love with on the movie screen or in the pages of a book, all seem to be alpha male-ish. But also, if you give it those like 50 Cleo Bachelor of the Year sort of types as well, those are the sorts of guys. There's the rule of sixes that you hear on sort of dating websites now, which is 6 foot, 6 figures, 6 inches, if you know what I mean, and a six-pack, so like a real alpha kind of guy. In my day, when I was dating back in the late 90s and things, it was the 4 C's of buying a diamond is cut, color, clarity, and carats. But the 4 C's of getting a husband was cash, car, credit, career. So if you're a guy, you have to have those 4 qualities. If you get yourself a girlfriend, the evidence seems almost endless that there's a huge pressure on males to have careers that isn't on females. And we're going to call this the pay gap. Surely this is like, oh, and suddenly you realize why we don't want to talk about this. This all ends in this really difficult sort of place of sexual morality. Like, are we really going to lecture women about what sorts of guys they can and can't date? Are we really going to say to girls, don't date him, you shouldn't date that guy, you know, and try and like force their choices for them? So, I mean, number one, if you want to close the pay gap, and there's an if, like, why would you? Who cares? So, like, yes, there are stats around half of all single elderly women live below the poverty line, but if we can fix up marriages so there aren't any divorces, 80% of divorces are started by women, so it's not as though men are kicking women out of their home. Women seem to be leaving. The number one reason, or the only statistically significant reason for divorces, from a big survey that I read in America once, and again I wrote a book on, is that the male doesn't make enough money. So women seem to want to leave because men don't make enough money, and then they're in poverty in old age, which is bad. I get that if they had their own jobs and could somehow compete with us for careers, which they just genuinely don't seem to be able to do, that's what the pay gap is, then they would have money ready for retirement. But in order for women to compete with us, we are going to either have to put the burden of performance on them, that is on me and is on us, and I feel it and it's real and it makes me sad and I don't like it, and I don't know why telling my daughter, if you don't make 100 grand a year, you're a worthless woman is a good thing. But I know that's what the world's going to say to my son, right? It's true. So I don't really like the idea of burdening women with this. The other thing we might say to men is, hey, if you don't make any money at all, if you don't have a big career, you're still fine, everything's okay, you'll get a wife. It's a lie. He won't. Guys that don't make money struggle to date. This seems intractable, and we might as well just get on with it and just say that the dating choices made by young women put pressure on men to make money, hence the pay gap. I know we're not going to do it. I know we're just going to accuse employers of having bias or somehow ignore the fact that 80% of gender studies and race studies and cultural studies degrees have women in them, and ignore the fact that only 20% of engineers are female. But anyway, this video has gone on long enough now. Thanks for listening. Please don't fall for this myth of the pay gap that everyone hates women so they don't pay them as much. Please don't try and undermine the market system. If women don't fetch the same price in the marketplace, that's the best measure we have. The market is efficient. After all, there are millions of participants. And if you really want to get into it, I did write a book on this. Bye now.